Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. On this occasion, the spotlight falls on Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, the Honourable Christopher Sinckler, who recently sat down with GIS Information Officer Sharon Austin Gilmore for an in-depth interview. Among the issues dealt with were the 2013 financial statement and budgetary proposals, the state of Barbados' economy, and the government's plans and programs for growth and development of the economy. Minister Sinckler tackled some of the concerns that have been raised by the public since his budgetary presentation in August. In responding to the suggestion by some that aspects of the budget constituted a bitter pill for citizens, he gave some background to the recession and its impact on Barbados, pointing out that government had sought to inform the public about the situation prior to the actual budgetary presentation.
We clearly identified for the country, long before the actual budgetary presentation, what the issues were that we were facing in relation to our economy. As you know, we were literally ravished in 2008-9 by the worst recession the world has seen in over 100 years. And you know, people keep saying that we make this point and that it is not true to say that we have had that impact. We really have had that impact. Not just Barbados, many other countries around the world. If you look and you'll see in the Caribbean, in some parts of Asia, Africa, Latin America, and of course mainly too in the industrialized economies, Britain, Western Europe, the United States, to some lesser extent Canada as well. So we've had to look at what we're doing, and it's a fluid situation. It is not a stagnant situation where you know, there's a set of circumstances, they're there and you're dealing with those only. It is an evolving situation, so it goes from one thing to the other, from a revenue to an expenditure to a real economy issue in terms of sectoral weaknesses, structurally growth issues. So you have to deal with all of those. I think Barbados has done reasonably well in the circumstances to really keep this economy and society together. I mean, it really could have been much worse. And any objective analysis of what transpired in the global economy and the impact which it had on us, particularly in our sectors, in tourism and international business, in manufacturing and agriculture, even in the retail distribution trades, in terms of the impact, it could have been much worse. We set certain goals, and we sought to achieve those goals in relation to the stabilization of the Barbados economy, to contain job losses, to protect our foreign reserves, and to try to bring the economy back to a growth path sustainably and built on the foreign exchange earning sectors as quickly as possible.
According to the minister, those measures resulted in varying levels of success. However, because the anticipated global recovery was less robust than expected, especially among our trading partners, recovery of some sectors was stymied. He gave details about several initiatives taken to stimulate growth.
Now, government has had to step in ways in which ordinarily we would not have had to do in those circumstances. And I think this is the point that needs to be made. If you look and you say, okay, this is the worst condition that you've had in terms of a decline in economic growth. Don't forget, in 2009, when we believed this thing would have bottomed out, our economy declined by over 4%, I believe 4.7%. Our fiscal deficit at the time had risen to as much as 9% of GDP. We were losing jobs at a fairly rapid rate. The unemployment rate had pushed past 9% towards 10% and trending higher. And we intervened to stabilize that situation in 2010 with budgetary measures, which again were not popular. As you know, we increased the value-added tax by 2.5%. We eliminated the tax-free allowances for travel and entertainment. We did other things to help cushion the impact of loss of revenues in the economy, raising of the excise tax on gasoline and so forth, and other fuel generally, and so forth and so on. And we saw the returns from that very early in 2011. On the expenditure side, we, as a matter of choice, but as a matter of necessity, intervene to protect the most vulnerable in the economy and the society from a virtual collapse of their circumstances. This didn't only go though to those persons in working class communities, it also went to businesses. Don't forget that we introduced a turf fund to help the tourism players of $25 million, which was grant money. It's not money that was paid back to us. And for a lot of businesses, had we not intervened in that way, it would have hurt them. We intervene in relation to the forgiveness of debts owed to government in terms of NIS, in terms of land tax, in terms of inland revenue, income tax, corporation tax, and others. Value-added tax and so forth and so on. You know, many people speak about what government owes businesses. Very few people talk about the debts that have been forgiven by government when times were tough. So we intervene, and each of these things have a cost. They really do. And therefore it adds up.
The minister explained that the latter part of 2012 saw a wobble in the fortunes of Barbados' major partners, including Britain, the United States and Canada.
So where in 2011 we had seen some green spouts coming out, where we had up to 0.6, 0.7% economic growth, it was flat in 2012 and started to look really challenging in 2013. So that by March, where we were able to consistently have a foreign exchange cover of close to 15, 16 weeks. In fact, we ended the year in 2012 with about 18 weeks cover. By March, up to that point in time, we had about $1.4, $1.5 billion in reserves. But we started to see from that period to about, say, from April to about June, we start to see a slide in our reserves. And that is when, through our consistent and I believe successful monitoring of our economic circumstances and the fundamentals of the economy through the management system that we've been able to put in place, we started to put actions together to be able to come up with a program. Now, that program was, I believe, fairly widely canvassed among the stakeholders, both in the social partnership and beyond that. In fact, I think we say the budget, but this program that we introduced was the most debated program. In fact, many of the measures in their broad context, perhaps with the absence of specific percentages or numbers, were presented to our social partners at several meetings. So people knew where our thinking was in relation to a significant proportion of those measures. Yes, the measures, as you would say, are tough, but in order to do the type of course correction that we have to do, those measures had to be tough.
He responded to perceived errors in the budget with regard to the consolidation tax and municipal environmental tax.
I mean, you can imagine the amount of times that the staff would have gone over the document. I mean, changing percentages here and there, the cutting and pasting that occurs in the document, the running of different models by the Division of Economic Affairs and the Ministry generally of Finance, and of course with line ministries themselves, particularly with specific policies. And therefore, from time to time, you might have one or two typographical errors that might occur. In relation to the consolidation tax, for example, that was a clear typographical error, which we picked up after. You know, sometimes you are doing a document, you're a journalist and you're doing a document and you read it and 20 different people read it. And then somebody comes along after you have signed off on it and look at it, and in the very first line, they see a mistake that 20 people read and didn't see. So these things happen. And there was a typographical error in relation to the consolidation tax on the two upper bands where we would apply, where we had said 2.5 and 3.5, which in fact should have been 3 and 2. So therefore, we had the competent tax authorities address that issue through the Commissioner of Inland Revenue. We have 3 months within which to bring that legislation to Parliament and to have those things. And I believe that is one of the reasons why that legislation was drafted that way, that you rely originally on the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act. Yes, that gives immediacy if you want to do it immediately. But if there is an error, or if there has been some typographical mistake, that can be corrected later in the law when you make it more permanent. And that is what we will do in relation to that. And you want to be as precise as possible, but you know that these things will happen. The estimates, for example, that we deliver every year, estimates of revenue, when that document is printed and presented by myself in the House of Assembly or any Minister of Finance, there are so many different typographical errors, heads incorrectly stated, amounts in terms of figures incorrectly stated, and you have to have addendum all the time to change them, to keep changing them and keep changing them. And I mean, there are loads of them that comes through during the week. The public doesn't see this because this is not televised on the program and people don't believe it. But these things happen. What you do is that when you identify that there's an issue, you deal with it. You deal with it purposefully and firmly, and you ensure that it is corrected. And that is what we have done. In relation to the municipal solid waste tax, you know, there was no error. I mean, I know that people are making heavy weather of what Minister Ennis would have said, and I think he was taken out of context, frankly, in what he was saying. Is a little unfortunate, but these things happen. The tax, as announced, is the tax. What we did, however, is to ensure that when we communicate, and don't communicate with the public, don't forget that this tax is not applicable until next year, perhaps starting in June or thereafter. So it's not to the next financial year. What we alerted the country is that there is going to be a solid waste tax that is going to be levied on certain types of properties, and it is going to be at certain ranges. Now, there are a few things that I think I need to say in relation to this. The solid waste, municipal solid waste tax is not a land tax. It will have its own separate legislation. We are working on that now. I believe we are finalizing what that will be and how it will function. So therefore, it is a mistake to treat it simply as another form of land tax in that way. So that what applies to the land tax in terms of methodology for calculation, exemptions in the system, those things are not going to apply pristinely to the solid waste tax. I think that's the first thing that has to be said. Again, as I said before, it is not applicable to next year. So what has happened is that since we've announced the tax, we've had, from the day after, we've had numerous suggestions from members of the public, from people who are into real estate, from ordinary homeowners, to people who have watched this situation in terms of watched land tax situations or that type of tax situation, accounting firms and so forth and so on, who have written to say, look, there is a way in which you can get what you need, but if we can change the formula, you can look at incidents in terms of impact on various segments of the society, how you can lessen that, and we take all of that on board. They're not intellectual eunuchs in the Ministry of Finance. We don't believe we have a title deed on knowledge. We make proposals based on what we fairly think would give us the type of tax yield we want, have the impact that we want in terms of helping us to reduce our deficit, as if it is a revenue-raising measure or even an expenditure measure. And then there are people who make interventions, and we take all of those on board. So we've taken quite a few on board. A lot of them really are to say that we shouldn't do the tax, period. But we are doing the tax, that is a fact. We've taken some suggestions on board, very useful suggestions, and if any of these are able to lessen the impact on the public while giving us the return that we want, then we will entertain those. And I believe in the coming weeks, you will see, as we bring the legislation to Parliament, when Parliament reopens, the public will get a very firm view of how the tax will be structured and so forth.
Asked what it would mean for the country if government continued to incur large amounts of expenditure without having a sustainable means of meeting the costs, the minister put it this way.
If you take it like an ordinary household, it would mean, or an individual, it will mean that you will be running from your creditors. If you incur huge amounts of debt because you are not bringing in enough money, you're not earning enough money on your own, or your household is not bringing enough money, but you are continually adding things to your expenditures, eventually you will have to borrow. And when you keep borrowing, you run up debts, and at some point in time, you're going to have a challenge paying them. And we are saying that our debt service commitments have now risen to a stage where from about 4% of total revenue to about 8%, that is too high. And the trajectory we see, if nothing is done, means it's going to get even worse. And the responsible thing to do is to intervene. And you have to intervene in a strong and firm manner. Yes, it is painful in some respects, but if you don't do that, the end result is even more pain. So we believe now is the time to intervene in a very serious way, to relook all of our assumptions, to hold a very conservative line on everything. We are not assuming that the world economy is going to come back. We are not assuming that we're going to have 2 and 3% economic growth when we are not going to have it. We are assuming that oil prices are going to remain high. We're going to put the correct assumptions in place so that the prescriptions that we propose to implement and that we do implement have the impact that we desire, rather than assuming that it's going to be a different set of conditions and everything is going to come back the way we want it to be. So to avoid that fiscal cliff, to avoid that debt cliff, to avoid a potential situation where we could very well run our reserves so low that we can't defend our currency, we have intervened, and I think that that intervention is the correct one at this stage.
Mr. Sinckler took the opportunity to give further insight into the special unit that has been set up to carry out the preliminary assessment of statutory entities.
The issue pertaining to the statutory entities is a very interesting one. Most people who look at government would usually say, the problem is not central government. Yes, central government does have some issues in terms of efficiencies, in terms of the process, facilitation, and there are 1 or 2 areas of wastage that can be handled. You see, the real issue for government is in the statutory corporations, what the international agencies call the non-financial public service. The ones that provide particularly the social services, sanitation, water, port services, and so forth and so on. These are the ones that occupy a large part of government's budget through subsidies and transfers. And when you're to do a successful fiscal consolidation that is sustainable over time, doing only the on-top macro adjustments in terms of fiscal policy through taxation or the cutting of expenditure here or there will not get you sustainably where you need to be if you don't correct the structural problems in your economy that drive that deficit and keep it unsustainably high. So we always knew from the redesign of our program that it is going to be necessary for us to address these structural issues. Issues which, frankly, in the terms of the fiscal structure of the country, have not been addressed over many, many, many decades. And they have built up this problem where you have large transfers being given to agencies that ostensibly are not in the best financial shape. And therefore, the more inefficient they are, the less precise and accurate their management is, the more they are going to call on central government for more and more money to basically, not I wouldn't say cover up, but basically compensate for those failures. But in the belly of the government, where the inefficiencies lie, particularly in those non-financial public sector entities, that we will have to do a restructuring program for those. And that is why we initiated the process by having our public investment unit begin to look at these agencies and to do a report for cabinet to look at where we have, and we identified 19 of those agencies. We grouped them according to function, operation, mandate, legislation, type of transfer, structure. We did all of that, and we've come up with a nice group of agencies grouped I believe in 3 groups that can be addressed in terms of a major restructuring program to make them far more efficient, to look at the ones that may be able to be merged, so that the functions they perform are not lost to the public, the service they provide is not lost to the public, but it can be done more efficiently with a tighter administration and better structure. Once we've completed that by December, which is the mandate from Cabinet, we will then engage our social partners, the private sector, and particularly the workers' unions, the labor unions, to ensure that they are on board. And then, of course, time permitting, because we have an April deadline for beginning that process. If time permits, we would open it up to the wider public for discourse, so that the public can contribute, maybe through town hall meetings or otherwise, to that process. But certainly, we will give the public a chance to intervene. So that's the timeline that we're working with.
How is government planning to put Barbados on a growth path?
The part that I really would like to expand on is confidence. And having the psychological mindset, as I say, to face the challenges as private sector, as labor, as government, as individual, as household. This is how we restore economy. Because at the end of the day, nothing happens unless you're invested in your own success. And what we're saying to Barbadians is, look, we have had good times. We know what it is to splash around and to splurge around in lots of money when times are good, and so. But we also know from our experiences in '91 and '81 and in the early '70s, we know what it is to navigate difficult waters. And we have to settle down and do so. And that is where we want to encourage the public of Barbados to work with us. And we believe that the vast majority of Barbadians are doing so. And that is where it is. Outside of that, I think we also have to ensure that we seize opportunities when they come up. And that's why government has been doing and has taken the decision to do things like the Ammon, to purchase the Ammon property, to remodel it and get it into a brand name manager that can bring value to Barbados. That is why we're going to be looking at additional properties in Barbados to do on a PPP basis, to ensure that we can restore the value of the quality of product of our tourism sector. That is why we are looking at projects that will bring foreign exchange into Barbados, whether it is the cruise pier project that separates cruise and cargo, whether it is the Pierhead project that brings the marina. All of these are going to contribute to what we believe will be a restoration of the investment into the economy to create that level of growth that we need going forward over the medium to longer term. What we need, though, is to have the patience to be able to ensure that we keep working at it, and that we don't, every time we get a bit of bad news, we drop our shoulders, we start to growl, we start to complain, the sky is falling, everything is bad. That's not what is going to get us out. What is going to get us out is identifying those opportunities, going after them aggressively, ensuring that we make Barbados the best, easiest, most congenial place to do business, so that investors will come with the type of investment we want. We can continue to build our reserves, we can continue to grow jobs, we can continue to ensure that our businesses are successful and that our households are comfortable. We're working on the pipelines issue. I think the Prime Minister has met with the unions or the major stakeholders in that issue, and we're going to have a very quick resolution of that shortly. This is my understanding. We have the leachate plant that we are working. Of course, as you know, we've been having some challenges with our garbage and potential leakage of leachate into the water supply, and we want to deal with that now before it becomes a problem. We have, of course, I told you, the cruise pier, the Pierhead project, and a couple other very interesting project, private sector investments, which unfortunately I am not allowed, I'm not empowered, I should say, to speak about, but that will, I believe, in the next few months, as they are revealed to the public by those private investors, some of whom are from outside of the country, will create that atmosphere that we need in the country, that things are going again.
And some final words from the minister. He believes our outlook is a positive one.
I'm very excited about Barbados' future. You know, there are people who are invested in the failure of this country, and I tell you, underestimate Barbados at your own peril. We have what it takes. We have a fundamentally good economy. We have a fundamentally good society. Yes, there are weaknesses around. Yes, there are challenges for government and for the private sector. But I think if we work together, we can achieve a tremendous rebound in our economy. And I think that this is where we have to be, not nitpicking on this thing and that thing and trying to create confusion and depress the population. We need to lift the spirits and say to people, look, let us pull together, let us make the sacrifices, let us make the investment, let us ensure that our economy can go forward, can create new jobs, can create new opportunities for investment, can produce a better society and a stronger society, even as we navigate these very difficult global waters. For us, the best is to come. The best is yet to come. I think we have a job to do. We have to implement the program. Government has laid out a path. We are sticking to those measures. We believe they are the correct measures, and we will invite Barbadians to walk with us hand in hand as we invest in the restructuring, the resuscitation, and of course the sustainable development and growth of this great Barbadian society.
And here is where we end this edition of In the Spotlight, where Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, the Honourable Christopher Sinckler, spoke about the budget and dealt with a number of issues that have been generating public discussion. I hope you found the program informative. I'm Sharon Lynch. Until next time, goodbye.